Well, let's now turn our attention to that African Development Bank report. Now, the bank has released its annual development effectiveness review for this year. According to the organization, this year's report tells the story of the bank's performance in the context of one of the most serious crises to affect Africa in the modern era. Now, the report analyzes the pandemic's impact both on Africa's development trajectory and also on the bank and its operations. Well, let's get the details on this year's Development Effectiveness Review. We're joined by Abdul Kamara. He's the Deputy Director General for the East Africa region at the African Development Bank. Great to have you with us on the show today, Mr. Kamara. Now, it is safe to say that this year has been atypical at the very least. Africa, as we mentioned, is barely emerging from one of the most serious crises that it has faced. So give us some insight into how this impacted the objective of this year's report and certainly the process of putting together this report.
Thank you very much, Uche, for hosting me. And I think the fact that this year has witnessed a crisis of unprecedented magnitude cannot be overemphasized. It affected us as it did to everyone. It affected the way we work, the way we communicate, the way we deliver, but more importantly, the way we measure or assess our results and performance. Uche, you know, at the African Development Bank, we place a lot of emphasis on results, on our delivery, on the impact we make on the lives of people. And that is where the annual Development Effectiveness Review comes into play. The annual Development Effectiveness Review is a report that gives the bank an opportunity to take a break every year and check and look back how best we are doing, how we are delivering, and what difference we are making in the lives of people. Of course, we get most of the things right, but there are also areas that we need to improve. And this year, very specifically, the preparation of the report clearly, even though it stayed on our conventional focus on the bank's long-term strategy, 2013-2023, and its operational priorities, the high fives, which I'm sure all of you know: Light Up and Power Africa, Feed Africa, Integrate Africa, Industrialize Africa, and improve the quality of life for the people of Africa. Even though we had to focus on assessing this, the report had to be nuanced to take into context the huge effort that we focused on the pandemic itself. And clearly, in that way, it affected the objectives, but it also affected the way we delivered, the report. Of course, we had to broaden the consultations at various levels with key stakeholders to ensure that we took their views into context. But more importantly, it also increased the rigor of data collection, as well as the depth of the analysis to put the COVID context, into perspectives.
Well, let's now take a closer look then at the role that the AfDB played in Africa's economies during this tumultuous period. Besides launching a $3.6 billion COVID-19 response facility, which provided emergency budget support for a lot of African governments, in the report you also point to the fact that you had to repurpose your lending programs to meet those changing needs and also put a special focus on health infrastructure. So tell us more about what the bank was able to achieve this year and of course in 2020, and how the pandemic changed the AfDB's approach to development aid, and of course your aid programs as well.
Yeah, clearly when the pandemic hit, the African Development Bank had to come in really in a big way. We must also commend the African governments for the bold steps that they took, because the pandemic had the potential, not only to significantly impact people's lives and erode their livelihoods, but to also roll back development gains that we had made over the past 10 years. As you know, the continent was on a positive growth trajectory. So the first thing that the African Development Bank did it launched a $10 billion COVID crisis response facility. This facility was precisely meant to support the low-income economies, and the facility is from our concessional window, the ADF, so that countries can access grants, but also concessional loans to help boost their response to the crisis in three ways. Firstly, it boosted and supported the capacity of countries to strengthen their health systems, to contain the virus, and more importantly, it helped countries to sort of scale up social protection programs. These programs, of course, differed from country to country, but generally they entailed employment protection, unemployment benefits, cash transfers, subsidies of various types, and so on. But more importantly, support to put the economies afloat. In other words, to inject liquidity into the system. In Ethiopia, for example, in July last year, we approved $165 million grant, which helped the country to pump in $47 million through commercial banks to microfinance institutions to keep businesses afloat, but also to protect jobs. In Kenya, we pumped in $205 million and so on. So these are some of the responses that we did on that side. But of course, for the high income economies as well, on the international market, we launched the world's largest ever US dollar denominated social bond, which is the $3 billion COVID social bond, which we launched on the London and Luxembourg stock markets, which really came in very, very handy to help countries to respond to the crisis. Indeed, this was very, very timely, and it was really well received, and it really received a lot of appreciation from the international scene. And of course, you are aware that for that year, 2020, the African Development Bank was rated by the world's most prestigious financial magazine, Global Finance, as the best multilateral financial institution in the world for our swiftness in responding, to the COVID. Of course, as I said earlier, beyond the COVID, we also stayed with some of our traditional, operations, but those had to be deferred. But I am happy to report that in spite of all of that, we were able to support businesses, especially micro and small businesses that made a revenue of about $2 billion, which helped them to stay focused, which helped them to weather the crisis, which also helped them to avoid massive job losses.
Well, as you assess your scorecard for this year, what were some of the biggest challenges you encountered in the delivery of that support, and how have you addressed that?
Yeah, well, I think when we talk of challenges, of course, the pandemic itself is the major challenge that we grappled with. It affected the way we do business. For example, on the side of the bank, and I'm sure it did to others, we had to work from home. Our travel restrictions made us to postpone missions. When we finance, as I said earlier, we are looking for results. We have to travel. We go there, we verify. We build roads, power pools, hospitals, and so on. We have to go and verify. Those were not possible, so everything became online. But I'm happy to report that we were able to deliver fully. The second part of the challenge was precisely what I was talking about just now, the impact on the economies themselves. Countries had a widened fiscal deficit precisely because their expenditures, social expenditures, and shoring up the economy, increased at a time when revenues were going down due to COVID-imposed restrictions and due to the shrinking of economic activities. So these were challenges, but I'm glad to report that we surmounted those challenges. Of the $10 billion COVID response crisis facility, by February this year, 2021, we were able to roll out about $9 billion. And we were also able to mobilize co-financing of $1.3 billion and significantly brought down project implementation and project preparation costs significantly. So yes, it was a challenging crisis, but we were able to adjust to it. We were very, very nimble, and we were able to deliver effectively.
Now, of course, realistically, this pandemic did threaten to undermine all the development gains Africa has made in the last decade, as well as some of the programs AfDB has put in place. So how would you sum up the development trends, especially in the East African region, in this post-COVID-19 period?
Uche, I can't agree with you more. As I said earlier, but just to be specific, the pandemic plunged the continent into a recession, an economic contraction in 2020 of about 1.8% of GDP growth, contraction in GDP growth. So the East Africa region, interestingly, was the only region that stayed afloat. In other words, the only region that avoided the recession and posted a positive growth of about 0.4%. Clearly, this has to do with the sustained good performance of agriculture. It had to do with increased public spending in large-scale infrastructure. It also has to do with regional integration. We also project that the East Africa region will see a positive growth in 2021 of about 4.1%, which will remain positive in 2022, about 4.9%. In 2023, about 5.6 and so on. But of course, let me be quick to say here that there are downside risks to all of this, especially for the region. Firstly, most countries in the region are oil importing countries, and we see that oil prices are rising. So that is a risk right there. And also, structural transformation has been very, very slow, as we see. And also, we are seeing conflicts are also resurging. But more importantly, the vaccine inequity and the slowness in access to vaccines could lead to a situation where, all of this growth we are talking about may not be realized. And now with the risk of a new strain of virus, the Omicron, we don't even know how this will play out. But on the economic side as well, we see that East Africa, is posting, very alarming numbers of debt. The external debt, the public debt, for example, which was at 40% of GDP in 2011, about 63% in 2019, just pre-COVID, is now at about 73%, debt to GDP ratio. This is alarming. So we are bringing the attention of countries to this. We are working with partners on various fronts, technical assistance, capacity building dialogue, but also through our instruments. Of course, we are helping them to get access to concessional financing, crowding private sector investment. We're doing infrastructure investments that will de-risk private sector investment. We are also using our own resources, to give project loans, corporate loans, public-private partnership deals in the energy sector, in the road sector, but more importantly, we also use instruments such as guarantees, partial credit guarantees and partial risk guarantees, which give comfort to private sector to invest in countries, that are relatively perceived to be risky.
Right. Well, we do have to leave it there, Mr. Kamara. Many thanks for your insights and for joining us on the show today. That, of course, is Mr. Abdul Kamara. He's the Deputy Director General for the East African region at the African Development Bank.